12,000 years ago, the world changed in an instant. The Ice Age was ending, forests were spreading, seas were calm, and then chaos. A fiery object tore across the sky, shattering into fragments that rained down fire. Forests ignited. Herds of mammoths and saber-tooths fled into smoke. And as the flames raged, glaciers cracked, unleashing torrents of water that swallowed valleys, drowned coasts, and erased entire homelands. In the space of a single generation, the Earth was plunged back into ice and flood. A reset so profound it may have wiped clean the memory of civilizations that came before. We learn in school that human history begins with the first farmers, the first cities, 5,000 years ago. But what if that is only half the story? What if a great flood triggered in the Younger Dryas erased an earlier chapter, one buried beneath oceans, entombed in ice, and remembered only in myth? Join me now as we descend into the echoes of that cataclysm. Together, we will follow the fragments, blackened soils, drowned lands, and whispered legends, to uncover whether the flood that ended the Ice Age also reset civilization itself. The air is hushed as if the world itself holds its breath. Imagine standing on the edge of a vast frozen plain at the twilight of the Ice Age, some 12,900 years ago. To the west, the sun sinks behind mountains still cloaked in glaciers. To the east, smoke plumes rise where forests burn. Fire and ice, two elements that should be opposites, fuse in this moment into a single omen. A comet blazes across the heavens, breaking apart into glowing shards, and the earth trembles beneath both flame and frost. This is the threshold of the Younger Dryas, an epoch that would slam the door on a warming world and plunge it back into cold chaos. We often think of time as a steady flow, but here it folds back on itself, like a river reversing course. Only centuries before, the great ice sheets that had gripped North America and Europe were melting. Sea levels had begun to rise, lakes had swollen behind fragile walls of ice, and humanity, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, tasted the promise of fertile lands and a gentler climate. Yet that promise was snatched away in what felt like a single breath. Ice returned, forests died, winds howled with dust, and temperatures dropped with terrifying speed. The record of this betrayal is written in Greenland's ice cores. Drilled 3 kilometers down, each layer captures a year in frozen memory. In these bubbles of ancient air, scientists have read the whispers of sudden collapse. Oxygen isotopes trace a plunge of up to 10 degrees Celsius in mere decades. One moment, the Earth warmed, its glaciers retreating. The next, it recoiled, as though wounded by some cosmic hand. The Younger Dryas was not a minor hiccup in climate. It was a fracture in the rhythm of the planet. But what caused it? Some say it was the Great Lake Agassiz, swollen with meltwater from the retreating Laurentide ice sheet, bursting its icy dam and pouring into the Atlantic. A flood so immense it stifled the ocean's great conveyor belt, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, shutting down the current that carried warmth northward. Without it, Europe froze. North America was buried in tundra, and the promise of spring turned into an unrelenting winter. Others whisper that it was not Earth itself, but the heavens, that a comet, or many comets, shattered in the sky, raining fire that burned forests to ash and sent dust into the stratosphere. Fires followed floods, cold followed fire. Civilization, if any had existed beyond the simple huts of foragers, was erased. Imagine the people who lived through this turn of fate. Hunters following reindeer across Doggerland suddenly found the grasslands swallowed by ice and sea. In the Fertile Crescent, Natufian villages that had begun to harvest wild grains were crushed by drought. In the Americas, mammoth hunters saw their quarry vanish in a haze of firestorms. Did they know what had struck them? Or did they, like us, weave stories to explain it? Tales of angry gods, falling stars, and floods that drowned the world. In this first act, we glimpse the paradox at the heart of the Younger Dryas. It was both an end and a beginning. The end of a warming age, the collapse of ecosystems, perhaps the destruction of civilizations we have forgotten, but also perhaps the beginning of what we call history. the crucible that forced humanity to adapt, to invent, to survive. To some, the Younger Dryas is a catastrophe buried in deep time. To others, it is the Great Reset, the flood that washed away an earlier chapter of our species and left us stranded on the shore of a new one. And yet the Earth does not leave its messages neatly packaged. The truth of this reset is scattered, in ice that remembers smoke, in bones of beasts that vanished, in myths of floods that echo across cultures, and in ruins that may have been built by survivors. To understand whether the Younger Dryas Flood truly reset civilization, we must follow these traces. From geology to legend, from fire-blackened soils to carved stones. As night falls on the frozen plain, the fire in the sky fades. The ice advances silently, swallowing rivers and valleys. The world waits. Humanity waits. The question lingers in the cold air. When the flood came, what did it erase, and what did it preserve, hidden beneath layers of silence? Picture yourself kneeling at the edge of a dry arroyo in the American Southwest. The soil shifts under your hand. Brown, tan, ochre, and then a thin, unmistakable stratum appears. A dark band of earth no thicker than a book's spine. Within it lie flecks of charcoal, grains of soot, and something stranger still. Iridium, platinum, and microscopic diamonds forged only in pressures beyond earthly fires. Archaeologists call these layers black mats. To some, they are nothing more than remnants of swamps and stagnant wetlands, but to others, they are veils of catastrophe, the ash blankets left behind by a cosmic storm that once swept the world. Across North America, Europe, the Middle East, and even South Africa, black mats surface at sites tied to the Younger Dryas boundary. At Murray Springs in Arizona, this charred stratum overlays the remains of mammoths and Clovis hunting tools, as though an invisible hand drew a curtain across one world before raising another. At Abu Huraira in Syria, charred seeds of barley and rye are found fused into glass-like fragments, as if the earth itself burned hotter than any campfire. In South Africa, sediments tell of wildfires so vast they could only have been sparked by something beyond the ordinary rhythm of climate. What could leave behind such scars, synchronized across continents? Advocates of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis argue that the black mats are the fingerprints of fire from the sky. A disintegrating comet or asteroid, exploding in midair, raining molten droplets and shockwaves that ignited forests and grasslands on a hemispheric scale. Soot darkened the atmosphere, dimmed the sun, and sealed the fate of species already weakened by climate stress. The nanodiamonds, those tiny crystalline lattices found within these mats, tell their own tale. They form only under extremes of heat and pressure, the kind delivered by cosmic impacts. At Arlington Canyon on Washington's Whidbey Island, researchers uncovered a black mat embedded with magnetic spherules, tiny droplets of melted rock that had cooled while falling through the sky. In Mexico's valley of Hueyatlaco, sediments bear similar metallic traces, like breadcrumbs leading back to a fiery origin. And in Greenland, platinum spikes in ice cores line up almost perfectly with the onset of the Younger Dryas, a chemical echo of something otherworldly arriving from above. Each site adds another stroke to the portrait of catastrophe, the mats binding them together as pages in a single global book of fire. Skeptics counter with another story, that wetlands and natural wildfires created these black bands, that the iridium could drift in from volcanoes, that the diamonds might not be cosmic at all, but artifacts of laboratory contamination. They point out that black organic-rich soils are common wherever groundwater once collected. Yet the mats appear at precisely the moment the Younger Dryas began, around 12,900 years ago. Their global distribution and their chemical anomalies resist easy dismissal. They whisper of a trauma sudden and vast, a reset so profound it would ripple through human memory as flood and fire myths. The haunting image emerges of a world burning while it froze. Vast forests ignited in North America. Smoke plumes darkened skies across Eurasia. Mammoths and dire wolves inhaled ash as glaciers crept forward again. For the humans who survived, the world must have seemed cursed. Skies turned red, waters poisoned, stars falling like arrows. Imagine stepping out of your shelter at dawn, expecting to see a clear sky, and instead watching glowing debris streak across the heavens as ash drifted down like snow. How could anyone live through such a vision and not shape it into myth? The cultural echoes suggest they did. The Hopi tell of fire falling from the sky before the flood came. Norse sagas speak of Fimbulwinter, a great freeze preceded by fire and smoke. Even the Mahabharata in India contains verses that sound eerily like cosmic explosions, skies lit with blazing projectiles, heat so fierce it withers forests. Could these distant traditions scattered across continents all be memories of a sky once filled with fire? But perhaps the most unsettling question is not how the black mats were formed, but what they concealed. Beneath them lie the bones of beasts and the traces of cultures erased. At Murray Springs, mammoth bones and Clovis points vanish above the layer, as if hunters and prey both stepped off the stage together. At Sheridan Cave in Ohio, tools, food remains, and bones show a vibrant life that ends abruptly in the soot. The mats are both veil and gravestone, marking a boundary where one world ended and another began. To walk along them in the field is to trace the edge of oblivion. Scientists still argue wetlands or wildfire, comet or climate. Yet even disagreement cannot erase the eerie synchrony of these dark layers, appearing like scars in the Earth's skin at the very moment humanity faced one of its greatest trials. The black mats force us to confront the possibility that history is not linear, but punctuated by resets, sudden storms that wipe away chapters before they are even written. And so, the charcoal veils invite us to wonder, were they nature's ordinary fires, or the signature of something greater, a cosmic assault that erased civilizations before we could remember them? What do you think? Accident of Earth, or evidence of catastrophe? Share your thoughts, and if you find these mysteries worth exploring, consider subscribing to join us on the journey through history's hidden shadows. The silence of an empty plain is never complete. Wind whistles through grass, crows cry overhead, yet something is missing. Imagine the same plain 13,000 years ago. It would have trembled beneath the weight of giants. Woolly mammoths trudged slowly across the tundra, tusks gleaming like crescents of ivory. Herds of giant ground sloths lumbered in forests, rising like moving boulders to strip branches from trees. Saber-toothed cats crouched in tall grass, muscles rippling, their fangs longer than a man's hand. Dire wolves, broad and heavy-boned, coursed in packs across the open steppe. This was not a wilderness devoid of life, but a pageant of enormous creatures. And then suddenly, the stage was emptied. The Younger Dryas coincided with a great dying. In North America alone, more than 30 species of large mammals vanished in a span of centuries. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-tooths, dire wolves, short-faced bears, camels, horses. In South America, the giants fell too, glyptodons armoured like walking fortresses, and ground sloths that towered over men. Australia had already lost its giants, but elsewhere, the extinction was abrupt and profound. The world shrank, and humanity would never again walk beside so many titans. At Rancho La Brea in California, tar pits preserve a snapshot of this twilight. Skeletons of saber-tooths and dire wolves litter the pitch, drawn in by trapped prey, their numbers swelling until the balance of nature collapsed. The tar records an uptick in injuries and desperation near the Younger Dryas boundary, as if predators strain to survive amid dwindling prey. At Murray Springs in Arizona, the evidence grows darker. Clovis spear points lie beside the bones of mammoths, sealed beneath that black mat of soot and carbon. Hunters thrived for a time, and then their prey was gone. Why did they vanish? Climate change is one answer. As the Younger Dryas set in, grasslands shriveled, water sources dwindled, and herds starved. Another answer is human overkill. Skilled hunters armed with fluted points, striking faster than animals could adapt. And then there is the cosmic hypothesis, that fire from the sky ignited forests, poisoned rivers with fallout, and plunged ecosystems into collapse. Each explanation alone is insufficient, but together they weave a tapestry of loss. The disappearance of megafauna was not only an ecological shift, it was a cultural one. For humans, these animals were companions, adversaries, and sacred beings. The mammoth's bones became shelters, its image adorned caves. The saber-tooth's power may echo in myths of fanged monsters slain by heroes of memory. When they vanished, humanity lost not only food and materials, but a cosmology. Imagine the shock. Children raised to hunt mammoth found themselves in a world where the mammoth no longer existed. Stories had to change. Rituals lost their meaning. Entire traditions may have dissolved into the silence. And yet, extinction breeds invention. Without great herds to follow, humans turned more to smaller game, to fish, to roots and seeds. The loss of beasts may have nudged our ancestors toward agriculture, forcing them to seek security not in pursuit, but in cultivation. The vanishing of giants became the prelude to villages, farms, and cities. Civilization, perhaps, was born in the absence left by those immense shadows. Still, the image of their fall lingers. Fossil beds in Mexico's Tula region, unearthed only in recent years, suggest mammoths buried suddenly, perhaps in floods or ash falls. The bones lie tangled, as if herds perished together in catastrophe. One can almost see them, trumpeting, panicked, fleeing smoke and falling fire, only to be overtaken by torrents of water and mud. In that vision, we glimpse the reset, life reordered by forces beyond comprehension. What does it mean when entire worlds of creatures vanish almost at once? For those who lived through it, it must have felt like the undoing of creation itself. Perhaps that is why myths from every corner of the earth recall floods, fires, and divine wrath. To lose the great beasts was to lose a cosmos. And in the void left behind, humans began to tell new stories, of waters rising, of gods punishing, of a world destroyed so another could be made. The black mats mark the veil. The bones beneath them tell of loss. But beyond bones and soil lies something more enduring. Memory. If whole cultures died with their beasts, perhaps the survivors carried fragments of their story forward in myth. The next part of our journey will follow those fragments, into tales of a great deluge, repeated across continents, as if humanity itself could not forget the night when fire fell, waters rose, and the world was reset. The story of a flood is older than any empire. It rises like a tide through myth and scripture, appearing wherever human voices have carried memory. Imagine sitting by a fire thousands of years ago, listening to elders speak of the time when the skies darkened, the rivers swelled, and the world was swept away. These tales do not belong to a single culture. They belong to all of us, echoing like a refrain across the human past. Could they be more than parables? Could they be the afterimage of a real cataclysm, the Younger Dryas Flood, that reset civilization itself? The most famous account lies in the Epic of Gilgamesh, etched on clay tablets in Mesopotamia. There, the flood survivor Utnapishtim tells of a storm that raged for 6 days, submerging the world. He builds a great boat, guided by divine warning, and saves the seeds of life. Centuries later, the book of Genesis tells of Noah, his ark, and waters that covered even the mountains. In both, the flood is not merely destruction, but a reset. Humanity cleansed, the slate wiped, and a new order born. Cross the oceans, and the stories persist. The Hopi of North America tell of fiery arrows raining from the sky, followed by waters that forced their ancestors into the safety of caves. The Ojibwe recall a flood so vast that only Nanabojo, the trickster, survived by clinging to a floating log. In Central America, Aztec myth speaks of the era of uncannily, when the gods drowned a world of giants to begin anew. Across the Pacific, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories describe ancient lands swallowed by rising seas, coasts receding, and people fleeing inland. Further north, the Norse spoke of Ragnarok, not only fire and war, but floods engulfing Midgard as the serpent Jörmungandr writhed in the sea. In China, the ancient legend of Yu the Great tells of a world inundated, where Yu spent years dredging channels to tame the waters so humanity could begin again. In India, the Matsya Purana recounts Manu, who was warned by a fish avatar of Vishnu to build a boat, saving humanity and animals from annihilation. Even in Polynesia, oral traditions across islands tell of a time when entire homelands were drowned, forcing migrations that shaped their seafaring legacy. Why should cultures separated by oceans and ages all remember the same terror? Scholars once dismissed these stories as archetypes, metaphors for renewal. But when paired with the evidence, the sudden floods of Meltwater Pulse 1b, the drowned plains of Doggerland, the charred mats that coincide with firestorms, the myths take on sharper edges. They may not describe one single flood, but a chorus of disasters, all converging in memory around the Younger Dryas. Consider also the details that resist coincidence. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood is tied to a star rising in the heavens, a celestial omen. The Hopi describe fire before water, a sky lit with falling stars. Aboriginal accounts recall not only rising seas, but specific coastlines that modern geology confirms were once dry. The Aztecs describe giants swept away, perhaps a cultural memory of megafauna vanishing in the same cataclysm. These resonances with scientific evidence suggest these are not inventions, but encoded testimonies of survival. What would it feel like to live through such a flood? Imagine standing on the shores of Doggerland, watching the horizon climb higher each year as the sea advanced. Or in the valleys of the Fertile Crescent, where drought turned soil to dust before sudden torrents reclaimed the land. To live in such a time was to inhabit a story of betrayal by the earth, of gods angry or indifferent, of the world remade against one's will. Those who survived would carry the tale, reshaped into myth, whispered so the children would not forget. And yet, these myths do not dwell only on loss. They speak of seeds saved, knowledge preserved, arks built, mountains climbed. Survival is always part of the pattern. Perhaps these were memories of small communities clinging to higher ground, or of leaders who guided their people through chaos. Or perhaps they point to something more provocative, the idea that survivors of a lost civilization carried fragments of wisdom forward, planting them in the soil of the Neolithic world. Archaeologists studying oral tradition note how accurately memory can persist. Stories among the Gunditjmara of Australia describe volcanic eruptions that occurred more than 30,000 years ago, details now confirmed by geology. If volcanic eruptions can be remembered for millennia, why not floods? If the Younger Dryas reset civilization, its trauma may have been carried in stories that eventually crystallized into scripture and legend. If myths are memory, then they are also maps. They guide us to look beneath the waves, to search the drowned coasts and sunken valleys for ruins. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay, sonar has revealed geometric structures submerged beneath silt, debated fiercely, yet evocative of cities lost to rising seas. In Japan, off Yonaguni, divers swim among stepped terraces and monolithic forms, natural or not, that suggest memory lingering in stone. Even in the Mediterranean, submerged walls and pavements appear beneath shallow waters, reminding us that much of human history may lie underwater, waiting to be rediscovered. The universality of flood myths tells us something profound, that humanity remembers catastrophe collectively. Each culture framed it differently. Divine wrath, cosmic balance, hubris punished, but all agreed on one truth: the world ended and then began again. The Younger Dryas may be the historical seed of that shared memory, the event so vast that it rewrote not only landscapes, but imaginations. From soot in the soil to beasts in the tar pits, from myths of God's wrath to pillars carved with animals, the pattern grows denser. The flood is everywhere, in story, in geology, in stone. And just as myths speak of survivors, the earth offers us a monument that seems to defy its time, standing like a sentinel against oblivion. It is to that place, Göbekli Tepe, that we now turn. Dawn rises over the hills of southeastern Turkey. The air is thin and cool, the horizon dusted in gold. From the crest of a hill emerges a circle of stone pillars, massive and deliberate, carved more than 11,000 years ago. Each stands taller than a man, weighing as much as 20 tons. their surfaces etched with foxes, snakes, vultures, and strange abstract signs. This is Göbekli Tepe, the sanctuary that should not exist, a temple built long before villages, long before agriculture, long before the world was supposed to know stoneworking on such a scale. Its builders, we are told, were simple hunter-gatherers, and yet the stones defy that simplicity. They whisper of something older, something remembered. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first uncovered these pillars in the 1990s, the timeline of civilization shifted. Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years, and the pyramids by 7. Conventional history insists that temples arise after farming, after cities, after hierarchy. But here, in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, that sequence is reversed. The temple comes first. It is as if trauma demanded monument, as if survivors of a great upheaval carved their memories into stone before they cultivated fields. Among the most striking carvings is the so-called vulture stone. Its motifs have been interpreted as a celestial record, a scorpion, a bird, and falling shapes that some researchers argue represent a comet shower in the constellation Sagittarius. Could this be a memory of the Younger Dryas impact, preserved not in words but in symbols? If so, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe are not mere art, but warnings, a stone library encoding the fire from the sky. Other carvings tell their own stories. Predators poised against prey, human-like figures without faces. Abstract H symbols repeated again and again. Some see these as mythic narratives. Others read them as calendars, astronomical charts, or instructions for ritual. Whatever their meaning, they carry the weight of intention. They say, "We endured and we must not forget." What makes Göbekli Tepe even more enigmatic is its burial. Around 10,000 years ago, its enclosures were deliberately backfilled with soil and rubble. It was not abandoned by chance, but entombed with care. Why would a society hide its greatest monument? Was it to protect it from invaders, or from memory itself? Or was it an act of closure, a ritual sealing of knowledge too dangerous to remain open? The site's context deepens the mystery. Just as the Younger Dryas ended, Göbekli Tepe was raised. The world was warming again, ice sheets retreating, seas surging. In the Levant, Natufian cultures turned to farming, perhaps guided by lessons inherited from elsewhere. Could Göbekli Tepe have been a gathering place for those who carried fragments of a lost civilization, refugees from drowned coasts or scorched plains, pooling their knowledge to rebuild in stone? Excavations have revealed multiple circular enclosures, some over 20 meters across, with central pillars framed by smaller ones. Only a fraction of the site has been uncovered. Ground-penetrating radar suggests dozens more lie hidden beneath the hill. In each enclosure, the two tallest pillars stand at the center, like guardians, often with stylized arms carved along their sides. These pillars are not faceless stone, but anthropomorphic presences, perhaps deities, ancestors, or mythic figures remembered from a world undone. Surrounding them are carvings of animals no longer present in the region: aurochs, boars, leopards, cranes, even spiders. Some scholars suggest these are symbolic clans. Others argue they are constellations, a bestiary of the heavens carved by those who watch the sky for omens. The density of symbolism feels overwhelming, as if the builders poured every fragment of their myth and science into stone, fearing nothing else would survive. The site's deliberate burial adds another layer of unease. To backfill Göbekli Tepe required immense labour, more than the effort to construct it. Was this an attempt to preserve the site for future generations, like sealing a message in a bottle? Or was it to close a chapter, to hide knowledge that had become dangerous or sacred? The earth over it became its shroud, and for millennia it slept beneath dust and grass, awaiting rediscovery. Conventional archaeology insists that hunter-gatherers could innovate on their own, that no lost civilization is needed. And yet, the sheer scale of Göbekli Tepe strains that argument. To organize hundreds of people, quarry and move stones, carve them with precision, and align them with celestial patterns requires more than improvisation. It requires memory, coordination, and vision. If the Younger Dryas Flood reset civilization, Göbekli Tepe may be the first page of the new book, one written by those who remembered what came before. Standing among its pillars, one feels both awe and unease. The stones are not merely supports, they are presences. They face inward as if in eternal communion. Their silence is heavy, but it is not empty. It speaks of skies turned hostile, of animals now vanished, of floods that erased homelands. It speaks of survivors who would not let memory die. And so, Göbekli Tepe stands as both monument and mystery. A temple older than history, buried by its own makers, filled with carvings that may encode catastrophe. Is it proof of a forgotten civilization, or the astonishing leap of hunter-gatherers? Were these pillars raised by ordinary people inspired by extraordinary trauma, or by the heirs of a world lost beneath floodwaters? What do you believe? Coincidence of history, or evidence of something deliberately erased? Share your thoughts, and if you find these enigmas worth exploring, consider subscribing to journey deeper into the shadows of our past. Beneath the grey waters of the North Sea lies a forgotten country. Its rivers once meandered through valleys, its forests whispered with wind, its plains supported red deer, aurochs, and wild horses. For thousands of years, Doggerland stretched between Britain and continental Europe, a vast and fertile expanse larger than many modern nations. People lived there, hunted across its grasslands, and fished its lakes and streams. Today, ferries pass overhead, oblivious to the drowned world beneath their keels. Doggerland is no myth. Its existence is recorded in pollen samples dredged from the seafloor, in peat deposits lifted by trawler nets, in mammoth bones and flint tools tangled in fishermen's nets. At the height of the last ice age, the sea was locked up in glaciers, and Doggerland was exposed. As the world warmed, sea levels rose, swallowing the land piece by piece. By the end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,500 years ago, the rising waters surged ever faster, and Doggerland's fate was sealed. Archaeologists imagine families migrating across its plains, setting up camps along riverbanks. Seasonal camps turned to more permanent settlements, with circles of huts clustered around hearths. They fished the estuaries, tracked reindeer across meadows, and watched as the horizon itself drew closer each year. Imagine a child standing on a bluff, pointing toward a distant line of waves and asking, "Why does the sea keep coming?" Their parents might have had no answer except to move inland. For those who lived there, the flooding was not sudden, it was relentless. The sea took valleys, then forests, then entire communities. By the mid-Holocene, Doggerland was gone, reduced to scattered islands and shoals. Modern sonar mapping has revealed traces of drowned landscapes, ridges that were once hills, channels that were once rivers, and even hints of settlement patterns. Beneath the waves, an entire chapter of human history lies sealed. But the drowning of Doggerland was not merely a regional event. It is a window into the global experience of the Younger Dryas's end. As ice sheets melted and Meltwater Pulse 1b surged into the oceans, coastlines around the world advanced. In the Mediterranean, villages retreated uphill. In the Persian Gulf, plains once teeming with life disappeared beneath the tide. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf drowned, scattering early communities onto islands. Doggerland is part of a vast, interconnected story of loss. The resonance with myth is haunting. Just as Plato spoke of Atlantis swallowed by the sea, so too did Doggerland vanish beneath waves. Could legends of drowned civilizations preserve memories of places like this? To a people who saw their homeland consumed, who watched forests become seabeds and rivers become channels of salt, the memory of a lost world would endure. Perhaps their descendants carried those memories into the Neolithic, where they merged with broader flood traditions. Doggerland also challenges our imagination of human resilience. Did its people simply retreat, or did they innovate? Some evidence suggests that the stress of losing homelands accelerated adaptation, pushing communities toward more complex societies, exchanging survival knowledge with neighbours further inland. The reset of Doggerland may have helped ignite the spark that led to agriculture in the surrounding regions. The North Sea hides its secrets well, but each storm reveals fragments, antlers, flint axes, bones of mammoth and human alike. These relics whisper that Doggerland was real, that people once thrived where only waves now roll. To peer into its drowned valleys is to see the reset written in water, a reminder that what is solid can become liquid, that what is home can vanish without a trace. As we drift from Doggerland's shores, we must follow the waters further still, for the sea's rise at the Younger Dryas's end was not a gentle tide, but a surge. A global flood, sudden and immense, known in science as Meltwater Pulse 1b. If Doggerland is the local chapter, Meltwater Pulse 1b is the global chorus. It is there, in the surge of seas that climbed faster than any human could outrun, that the myths of a great flood find their truest echo. The ocean remembers. Beneath its restless surface lie reefs that once stood in the sun, valleys now drowned in silence, and coastlines erased in the blink of geological time. Around 11,500 years ago, as the Younger Dryas ended, the seas did not merely rise. They surged. Scientists call it Meltwater Pulse 1b, a sudden global flood that may have lifted sea levels by more than 7 meters in little more than a century. For those who lived along the coasts, it must have felt as if the gods themselves had torn open the oceans. The record of this surge is etched into coral. Off the shores of Tahiti, drill cores capture the vertical growth of coral reefs, climbing desperately toward the light as the seas rose faster than they could build. These corals mark a sharp spike in sea level rise, a pulse so swift it outpaced anything in the preceding millennia. In Greenland's ice, isotopes reveal abrupt warming. In Antarctica, cores record a parallel story. The Earth, in a moment, shifted its balance, and the oceans rushed to claim the land. What caused such a surge? One vision sees walls of ice collapsing as the planet shook off its frozen mantle. The Laurentide ice sheet covering much of North America may have fractured, its meltwater released in torrents that spilled into the Atlantic. Another vision invokes cosmic fire, comets exploding over glaciers, melting ice in days and weeks rather than centuries, unleashing floods that cascaded across continents. Either way, the outcome was the same. The seas rose, and with them a tide of loss. Imagine the perspective of those living then. Along the shores of the Persian Gulf, fertile plains vanished, replaced by salt water that crept inland each season. In Southeast Asia, the vast shelf of Sunderland, now Indonesia, dissolved into an archipelago of scattered islands. In the Americas, coastal sites were swallowed, erasing evidence of cultures that may have flourished before the flood. In Europe, Doggerland shrank to islands, then disappeared. The Great Flood of memory may not be a single story, but the collective trauma of countless communities watching their horizons vanish. It is tempting to see these floods as slow, a few centimeters each year, barely noticed by generations. Yet studies suggest pulses within the broader rise, surges that could have lifted seas by tens of centimeters within a lifetime. For a coastal village, this was disaster incarnate. Fields salinated, houses collapsed into the surf, sacred sites disappeared beneath the tide. To witness such change was to watch the world reset before one's eyes. Here, myth and geology intertwine. The story of Noah's Ark, of Utnapishtim's boat in Gilgamesh, of Manu's fish in the Hindu Vedas, each speaks of waters that rose beyond mountains, of survivors who carried seeds and knowledge into a new age. The science of Meltwater Pulse 1b gives these stories weight. It shows that oceans did leap, that floods did come, and that survivors may indeed have been forced to preserve fragments of civilization. The implications are profound. If coastlines rose 7 meters in a century, then entire cities, if they existed, could have been lost beneath the waves. Temples, harbours, libraries of stone, now sealed in silt and sand. The reset may not have left us empty-handed. It may have scattered clues across the seafloor, awaiting discovery by sonar and submersible. Already hints emerge: walls off the coast of Spain, structures off India's Gulf of Cambay, drowned settlements in the Black Sea. Are these anomalies, or whispers of a world erased by Meltwater Pulse 1b? And yet, science remains cautious. Some studies question the scale of the pulse, suggesting a slower rise or multiple smaller surges. Even here, the record is contested, blurred like myths retold too many times. But whether sudden or steady, the seas did rise. The Earth turned a page, and humanity was forced to rewrite itself upon a smaller stage. If Meltwater Pulse 1b is the flood behind the legends, then Plato's tale of Atlantis may be its most enduring echo. A great civilization, wealthy and proud, swallowed by the sea in a single night. Was Atlantis a metaphor, or a memory of the very events that reshaped the coasts at the Younger Dryas's end? To find the answer, we must follow the waters west, to the Atlantic, where the story of a lost island empire continues to haunt the imagination. Night falls over the Atlantic, and the sea is restless. Waves strike against the cliffs of Spain, and beneath the surf, sonar scans reveal patterns that should not be there. Concentric ridges, linear walls, shapes that look less like geology and more like the bones of a city. Some dismiss them as tricks of current and sand, but for others, they are the first glimmers of a story told for over 2,000 years. The tale of Atlantis. Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, spoke of a mighty civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Atlantis, he said, was a naval power, rich in resources and knowledge, that grew arrogant and was punished by the gods. In a single night of earthquakes and floods, the island vanished beneath the waves. Scholars have long debated whether this was allegory, political parable, or garbled history, but when read through the lens of the Younger Dryas Flood, Plato's account feels less like invention and more like memory. The timing is uncanny. Plato dated Atlantis to 9,000 years before Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, a span of time that places the catastrophe around 11,600 years ago. This aligns almost perfectly with the end of the Younger Dryas and the surge of Meltwater Pulse 1b. Could it be coincidence that his date echoes the very moment when seas rose and civilizations, if they existed, would have drowned? Evidence stirs uneasily on the seabed. Off the coast of Cadiz, researchers have mapped submerged structures that resemble walls and towers. In the Azores, sonar has revealed pyramidal forms rising from the ocean floor. Off Cuba, divers have reported geometric stone blocks lying in deep water, as if streets once paved now lie silent beneath the tide. In southern Spain's Doñana wetlands, geologists have identified circular earthworks that some claim mirror Plato's description of concentric canals. None of these finds are definitive, all are contested, yet together they whisper that something may have been lost. If Atlantis was real, what sort of place was it? Plato describes concentric rings of land and water, a central acropolis, temples clad in precious metals, and a fleet of ships that commanded the seas. Imagine an island where harbours curved like petals, where towers gleamed in the sun, and canals carried traders from distant lands. A place where mathematics, astronomy, and seafaring were cultivated with precision. A civilization that saw itself as chosen, only to be undone by hubris and disaster. Others envision Atlantis not as a single island, but as a network. Perhaps Atlantis was a memory of multiple civilizations thriving on coasts now drowned. The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, Doggerland in Northern Europe, Caribbean plateaus long lost beneath rising tides. Survivors of each catastrophe may have carried fragments of memory inland, their stories merging into a single archetype, the city swallowed by the sea. Atlantis is not the only drowned world remembered in lore. In India, Tamil traditions tell of Kumari Kandam, a lost land south of the continent where great dynasties once flourished before the ocean claimed them. In the Pacific, Maori stories describe Hawaii, an ancestral homeland now beneath the waves. In Japan, tales linger of Yonaguni, and off Yonaguni's coast, divers have indeed found immense stone terraces that some argue are natural, while others insist are the ruins of a sunken city. Everywhere the seas have risen, myths of drowned homelands follow. Yet if Atlantis is metaphor, it still matters. For what is a metaphor but a vessel of truth carried through time? Plato's story warns of hubris, of societies that grow too powerful, too careless, and are undone by forces beyond their control. In that sense, Atlantis is every lost world. Doggerland, the Persian Gulf Plain, the drowned Sunda Shelf. Its myth survives because it resonates with the human fear that what we build can vanish in an instant. The allure of Atlantis lies not only in its possible reality, but in what it symbolizes. It is the ghost of a forgotten chapter, an idea that civilization may be older, more cyclical, and more fragile than we believe. If the Younger Dryas Flood did reset civilization, Atlantis is its most enduring echo, a story that survived when cities did not. Imagine survivors climbing to high ground, looking back as their harbours drowned, their temples swallowed, their homes erased. Imagine their descendants carrying the tale, reshaping it over generations into parable. To them, the gods had punished arrogance. To us, it may have been nothing more than a shift of climate, a collapse of ice, a surge of seas. But through myth, the trauma lived on. The question remains unresolved. Was Atlantis a memory of the Younger Dryas Flood, or a moral tale crafted to caution Athens? Or could it be both? History transmuted into lesson. Its survival across centuries, in text and imagination, suggests that even if Plato's details are invention, the core is older. A flood, a fall, a civilization reset. And so, Atlantis continues to haunt. Scholars debate, explorers dive, storytellers weave. Perhaps it was never meant to be answered, only remembered. Perhaps its role is not to be found, but to remind us that civilizations can and do vanish, not always with a whisper, sometimes with a roar. Not all evidence of lost worlds lies buried in stone or drowned beneath the sea. Some is carried within us, hidden in the spirals of our DNA, whispering of lineages that lived, thrived, and then disappeared. Imagine the human genome as a library. Most of its shelves are filled with familiar volumes: African hunter-gatherers, early farmers from the Fertile Crescent, steppe pastoralists, East Asian ancestors. But between the lines, in the gaps between chapters, there are missing books. These are the ghost populations, peoples who no longer exist, but whose genetic echoes haunt us still. Recent advances in ancient DNA studies have revealed startling patterns. In Eurasia, genomes of Mesolithic foragers contain signals of admixture from unknown groups, genetic shadows that do not match any surviving population. In the Americas, early human remains, like those of the 12,600-year-old Anzic child in Montana, reveal connections both to Siberian ancestors and to populations that have no clear descendants. In Africa, ghost lineages dating back tens of thousands of years weave through the DNA of modern peoples, survivors of branches that vanished before written memory. What if some of these ghost populations were erased during the Younger Dryas cataclysm? If whole coastal societies were drowned by rising seas or scattered by floods and firestorms, their genetic signatures might only survive as faint traces in those who fled inland. The sudden climate reversal would have fractured communities, driving migrations and mixtures. The genetic record becomes a palimpsest, overwritten by later histories, but faintly visible to those who know how to read it. One striking case lies in the Fertile Crescent. Genomes from early Neolithic farmers show evidence of a mysterious ancestry, neither purely local nor entirely foreign, that seems to appear just after the Younger Dryas. Could these be the descendants of displaced peoples, refugees from drowned coastlines or collapsed ecosystems, who brought with them knowledge of cultivation, seeding the agricultural revolution? If so, DNA preserves what archaeology cannot: the footsteps of forgotten survivors. The notion of ghost populations deepens the idea of a reset. Civilizations may fall, their monuments lost, but their bloodlines ripple onward, hidden in the living. To look at the genome is to glimpse civilizations erased by flood, their voices silenced, yet their legacy carried in the cells of their descendants. The Younger Dryas did not just change landscapes, it reshaped the very composition of humanity. This perspective alters the way we view myth. Flood stories may not only be cultural memories, they may be ancestral memories encoded in genes and passed down as instincts, songs, and archetypes. The trauma of catastrophe could have imprinted itself both biologically and psychologically, shaping not only who survived, but how they remembered survival. In this sense, the flood is written into our flesh as much as into our stories. But the trail of ghost populations raises more questions than it answers. Who were they? What knowledge did they possess? Why did they vanish so completely that only fragments of DNA remain? Perhaps their homelands are now continental shelves beneath the ocean. Perhaps their monuments lie under silt and coral. Or perhaps, like Göbekli Tepe's builders, they left warnings in stone waiting to be recognized. From the hidden code of our genomes, we turn next to the artifacts left in plain sight. Not strands of DNA, but stones, maps, and objects that refuse to fit the timeline. These anomalous relics, from megaliths that seem too precise for their age, to maps depicting coastlines thought unknown, suggest that fragments of forgotten civilizations may have survived the reset. And it is to these sacred stones and mysterious maps that our journey now leads. In the twilight of human memory, there are objects that do not belong. They sit in museums or lie half-buried in soil, silent but defiant, refusing to conform to the neat progression of history taught in textbooks. Some are stones too massive and precise for their supposed makers. Others are maps etched on parchment centuries before explorers ever reached the lands they depict. Each is a fragment of a world that should not exist, unless, of course, a civilization reset during the Younger Dryas once carried knowledge forward, scattering it like shards of glass in the sand. Consider Baalbek, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. There, beneath the ruins of a Roman temple, lie megaliths so vast that even today's cranes would strain to lift them. The trilithon blocks, each weighing over 800 tons, rest with joints so precise that a blade of grass cannot slip between them. Official narratives say the Romans built atop earlier foundations, yet who carved and moved stones of such scale remains a mystery. Could they be the echoes of a people determined to anchor permanence after impermanence, survivors building monuments meant to endure beyond flood and fire? Then there is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. On its surface, among known coastlines of Africa and South America, lies a depiction of Antarctica, not as a continent shrouded in ice, but with rivers and mountains exposed, as it might have looked before glaciers advanced. Skeptics call it coincidence or creative guesswork. Yet if the map truly reflects pre-glacial geography, it suggests the inheritance of knowledge from a seafaring culture long before recorded history, perhaps one erased at the Younger Dryas's end. Other anomalies join the chorus. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device capable of modelling celestial cycles with clockwork precision. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfectly round and aligned with astronomical patterns. The dolmens of Korea and Europe, echoing one another across vast distances. Each seems to carry a whisper. We knew more than you remember. How do these anomalies connect to the Younger Dryas? Imagine a civilization thriving on coasts now submerged, maritime, mathematically adept, astronomically aware. When the seas rose, their cities drowned, but fragments of their knowledge survived, carried inland by refugees. Over centuries, memory blurred, tools were lost, but hints remained, encoded in stones, embedded in maps, preserved in mechanisms whose origins were forgotten. These fragments are like glowing ruins in the dark, reminders of a chapter erased yet not wholly destroyed. Skeptics argue that human ingenuity alone explains them, that Romans could indeed move enormous stones with earth ramps and labour, that mapmakers combined travellers' tales and imagination, that ancient artisans refined skills through trial and error. And perhaps they are right. But in the context of a Younger Dryas reset, the anomalies take on a different hue. They may be not outliers, but survivors. Relics from a shattered world, glimpses into a heritage larger than our current timeline admits. To walk among the megaliths of Baalbek, or to trace the impossible coastlines of Piri Reis's map with your finger, is to sense the presence of something just beyond reach, a lost geometry, a vanished memory, a folded time where civilizations rose and fell before the one we call our own. If such relics survive above ground, how many more lie buried in archives or submerged beneath seas or deliberately dismissed by institutions wary of rewriting history. The silence around them fuels suspicion that a conspiracy of forgetting, whether accidental or deliberate, guards the thresholds of our past. And so we must now descend into that silence, into the realm where theories of cosmic fire and ancient knowledge collide with accusations of pseudoscience and suppression. There are moments in history when silence is louder than speech. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, with its black mats, nanodiamonds, and flood myths, has stirred imaginations across the world. Yet each time evidence emerges, a crater in Louisiana, cosmic dust in Baffin Bay, a sudden pulse of sea rise in Tahitian corals, the chorus of doubt rises just as quickly. Critics label the data flawed, the methods sloppy, the conclusions pseudoscience. Retractions multiply, conferences grow heated, reputations are scarred. But beneath the academic debate lies a question that chills. Is this merely the rigor of science at work, or is there a deeper reluctance to face the possibility of a reset that rewrote civilization? Consider the Comet Research Group, led by figures like Alan West and supported at times by writers such as Graham Hancock. They point to anomalies in the soil, iridium, platinum, microspherules, and claim these are the fingerprints of a cosmic strike. Their work, published in journals, gains headlines only to be met with waves of criticism. A paper linking an airburst to the biblical city of Sodom was retracted, accused of image manipulation and poor controls. Skeptics argue that black mats are natural wetlands, that nanodiamonds can form in ordinary processes, that fire alone does not require comets, and yet the evidence persists, recurring across sites, demanding explanation. Why such resistance? One explanation is caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and to rewrite history demands evidence beyond doubt. Another is institutional inertia. Archaeology has long been wedded to gradualism, the belief that change is slow, incremental, predictable. Catastrophe threatens that foundation. To admit that a comet reset civilization 12,000 years ago would overturn decades of scholarship, rewrite timelines, and open the door to questions once dismissed as fringe. But some see more than caution. They see suppression. They note how funding flows more easily to studies of gradual warming than to impact research. They point to how controversial findings are quickly buried in technical rebuttals, how media outlets frame catastrophic theories as pseudoscience, how voices like Hancock's are derided rather than debated. Could it be that knowledge of earlier civilizations, erased by flood, is too disruptive? That to acknowledge them would unravel the narrative that our history began only 5,000 years ago with Sumer and Egypt? Conspiracies, of course, thrive in silence. The more institutions resist, the more suspicion grows. Hancock himself frames it as a war between narrative control freaks and seekers of forgotten truths. Whether one agrees or not, the hostility toward alternative theories keeps the flames of doubt alive. For the audience, the result is not clarity, but uncertainty. A fertile ground where myths and science entwine, where glowing ruins seem to beckon from the shadows. Perhaps the truth is simpler. Perhaps scholars fear not only being wrong, but being associated with catastrophists like Immanuel Velikovsky, whose visions of colliding planets earned ridicule. To defend reputations, they reject anything that smells of cosmic drama. Yet if so, the danger is that the caution itself becomes a conspiracy of forgetting, that history's guardians, in their effort to protect, have hidden the very keys to its locked doors. And so the conspiracy of silence may not be deliberate but structural, a silence born of fear, of dogma, of funding priorities. Still, to those seeking answers, it feels deliberate. And in that perception, the story of a Younger Dryas reset acquires another layer, not only a cataclysm that erased civilizations, but a modern reluctance to acknowledge what might lie buried in ice and sea. If the silence of institutions obscures the past, the resilience of survivors illuminates it. For even in catastrophe, people endured. They adapted, carried knowledge, planted seeds. Out of flood and fire came farming, villages, and the first true societies. To trace the reset is to trace not only what was lost, but what was reborn. And so we follow the survivors into the Levant, into the Fertile Crescent, where humanity turned from wandering to planting, from foraging to foundation. The cold was receding. Ice sheets that had clawed across the northern world began to retreat, and the seas, though restless, gave back a gentler climate. Out of the chaos of the Younger Dryas, survivors emerged, carrying scars in memory and perhaps fragments of knowledge. They stepped into a new world and began to reshape it. This was the Neolithic dawn, not the beginning of civilization, but its rebirth. In the Levant, the Natufians had already begun to flirt with permanence before the Younger Dryas struck. Their semi-sedentary villages, built near wild stands of cereals, were abandoned when drought withered fields and rivers shrank. Yet when warmth returned, these same people returned to the valleys with something new: the deliberate sowing of seeds. Archaeologists find traces of emmer wheat, barley, and lentils cultivated around 11,500 years ago, right as the floodwaters and ice receded. Farming did not rise gently. It appeared as if urged by necessity, a direct response to the reset. Imagine a community gathered at the edge of a field. Elders recall stories of abundance before the Great Cold, of lands swallowed by water. They tell of fruits and grains once plentiful, now remembered only in scraps. Into the soil they press seeds, guided by memory, chance, or perhaps teachings passed down from ancestors who had known cultivation before the flood. The Neolithic revolution may not have been invention, but restoration, a reawakening of practices preserved by survivors of a lost world. The genetic evidence supports this tale of mingling and renewal. Ancient DNA studies reveal that populations in the Fertile Crescent were not isolated. They carry traces of ghost lineages, people who may have fled from drowned coastlines or collapsed ecosystems during the Younger Dryas. When they mingled with Natufians, they brought not just their blood but their knowledge. Farming, herding, and astronomy may have been gifts from these displaced groups, fragments of a civilization erased, yet not wholly lost. Sites like Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, bear witness to this transition. Its earliest walls rise around 10,000 years ago, perhaps not to keep enemies out, but to hold waters back. Elsewhere, Chaionu and Nevalachori reveal early communal architecture, echoing the grander sanctuaries of Göbekli Tepe. These were not random leaps. They were coordinated steps, as though people were guided by memory older than their lifetimes. What if the trauma of the Younger Dryas catalyzed this transformation? Hunter-gatherers, faced with scarcity, could no longer rely on the chase alone. They turned to the earth, planting not only crops but permanence. Fire and flood stripped them of giants, drowned their homelands, and scattered their kin. In return, they built walls, sowed fields, and carved stones aligned with the heavens, acts of defiance against impermanence. Yet the mystery deepens. How did communities with no metals, no wheels, and no writing coordinate the construction of monumental sites like Gobekli Tepe? How did they map the stars, track the seasons, and organize labor? Perhaps they were not starting from nothing, but from fragments of a lost whole. Survivors may have carried forward rituals, myths, and techniques that seeded the Neolithic. The first farmers may in fact have been heirs to an earlier drowned civilization. This possibility redefines the reset. The Younger Dryas did not merely destroy, it also planted. It burned away one world, but from its ashes rose the conditions for agriculture, settlements, and the eventual flowering of Sumer, Egypt, and beyond. The trauma of loss became the soil of innovation. Civilization as we know it may be the child of catastrophe. As we reflect on the resilience of survivors, another layer of the story emerges. The Younger Dryas was not only fire in the sky and drought in the earth, it was also water unleashed from ice. Torrents carved new landscapes, reshaping continents, gouging valleys, and leaving scars that remain visible today. To follow the reset further, we must listen to the rivers and canyons that bear witness to floods so immense they seem impossible. the glacial outbursts that turned stone to sculpture and left humanity scrambling to higher ground, stand on the cliffs of eastern Washington, and the land itself seems scarred by violence. Canyons split the earth in ragged gashes. Vast dry channels stretch for miles, their beds littered with boulders the size of houses. Basalt walls rise abruptly, polished smooth as if by a giant hand. To geologists, this is the channeled scablands, a landscape carved not by rivers that meander over millennia, but by floods so sudden and immense they defy imagination. For years, such an idea was dismissed. In the early 20th century, J. Harlan Bretz, a geologist, proposed that the scablands were created by catastrophic outbursts from Glacial Lake Missoula, a body of water held back by an ice dam larger than many modern seas. When the dam failed, torrents rushed westward, unleashing walls of water hundreds of feet high, travelling at freeway speeds, scouring valleys, and leaving behind the chaotic scars still visible today. His colleagues ridiculed him, preferring gradual explanations. Only decades later, when the evidence could no longer be ignored, did the floods become accepted fact. These cataclysms were not isolated to Washington. Across the northern hemisphere, glacial outburst floods left their marks. In Canada, the immense Lake Agassiz periodically spilled into the Arctic and Atlantic, releasing volumes of fresh water so vast they altered global ocean currents. In Siberia, similar outbursts reshaped valleys and drained into the Arctic Ocean. In Iceland, Jökullaups, sudden glacial floods, swept across the land with destructive force, some occurring within human memory. During the Younger Dryas, these floods took on a global resonance. The sudden release of glacial lakes may have contributed directly to the climate's violent swings. Freshwater surges disrupted the Atlantic conveyor, halting the flow of warmth northward, plunging Europe back into ice. At the same time, they may have accelerated sea level rise, drowning coasts already vulnerable from meltwater pulse surges. For those living nearby, these were not distant phenomena, but lived catastrophe. A valley that was fertile one day and buried beneath torrents the next. Picture the people of that age, hunters resting by a riverbank, only to see the horizon darken. A roaring wall of water sweeping trees, boulders, and beasts before it. Campsites erased in minutes, tribes scattered, survivors climbing to higher ground, stunned by the silence that followed. Such moments would live on in story, in memory transmuted into myth. Gods unleashing floods, waters swallowing the world. The scablands remind us that catastrophic floods are not fantasy. They are etched into the earth. If Lake Missoula could drown whole valleys in hours, what might have happened when larger ice dams collapsed at the end of the Ice Age? Imagine Lake Agassiz, larger than all the Great Lakes combined, releasing its waters in a single cataclysm. Such an event could have drowned coasts, shifted climates, and erased entire communities. The connection to the Younger Dryas reset is stark. These floods reveal how ice itself was not passive but volatile, storing potential energy that, once released, reshaped the planet. Civilization, if it clung to those shores, would have been helpless before such forces. Entire homelands could vanish in a single season, leaving only memory behind. Yet out of the chaos, new landscapes emerged, fertile valleys, rich soils, and new waterways. For survivors, the floods were both destruction and opportunity. They forced migration, but they also carved the stage upon which the Neolithic world would rise. The reset was not a clean slate but a scarred canvas, one on which humanity painted its next chapter. And so we see that floods were not confined to myth, but to stone, not to scripture, but to geology. The world reset itself not once but many times, as ice and water played their violent duet. What if the monuments of the Neolithic, circles of stone, alignments of pillars, were built to remember not just the fire from the sky, but the waters from beneath the ice? To explore this possibility, we turn to the monuments themselves, where stone seems to speak across time, portals through which memory of the reset was carried forward. At midsummer dawn in southern England, light spills across the horizon and threads through the standing stones of Stonehenge. The alignment is deliberate. The sun rises in a precise notch, illuminating the inner circle. To us it feels ceremonial, astronomical, mysterious. But to those who built it thousands of years ago, it may have been more than ritual. It may have been a message, a reminder carved into the earth itself, a portal through which memory of catastrophe could pass into the future. Stonehenge is not alone. Across the world, ancient monuments rise from soil and shadow, aligned with solstices, equinoxes and star paths. At Karahantepe in Turkey, newly uncovered T-shaped pillars echo those of Göbekli Tepe, carved with animals and abstract symbols. In Peru, the megaliths of Sacsayhuaman lock together with such precision that even earthquakes cannot shift them. On Easter Island, Moais stare inland, guardians whose gaze some researchers believe mark celestial alignments, different cultures, different continents. Yet all share a fixation on sky, stone, and permanence. Why? Perhaps these monuments were attempts to anchor time, to stabilize memory after it had been shattered. If the Younger Dryas Flood reset civilization, erasing coasts and scattering peoples, then survivors might have sought a way to ensure their story endured. Unlike wood or clay, stone endures for millennia. To carve into it is to speak across time. Align it with the heavens, and it becomes not just monument but message, marking the rhythms of the sky that once betrayed them. Consider the vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe, where animals and symbols appear to encode a celestial event. Or the megaliths at Nabta Playa in Egypt's desert, aligned with the summer solstice around 7,000 years ago, centuries before the pyramids. Such alignments may have been practical, helping track seasons for farming, but they may also have been sacred, a way to watch the skies for signs of return, of fire, of flood, of reset. The motif of portals recurs. Dolmens in Europe and Asia, massive stones arranged in door-like shapes resemble thresholds. Were they tombs or symbolic doorways to another world? Reminders that civilizations too pass through death into rebirth? At Newgrange in Ireland, a passage grave channels the midwinter sun deep into its chamber, illuminating carvings of spirals and chevrons. To stand within it at dawn is to feel drawn into a dialogue with time itself. If these monuments are portals, then they serve a double function. For the builders, they were connections to ancestors and gods. For us, they are connections to builders themselves, voices from the past, speaking in alignments and geometry. They tell us that people remembered something vast, something worth inscribing into stone so it would not be forgotten. Skeptics argue that alignments can be coincidence, that human eyes find patterns where none exist. Yet the repetition across cultures is difficult to ignore. Everywhere, from Anatolia to Britain to the Pacific, stone speaks the same language. The sky matters. The cycles of the heavens are recorded, preserved, and ritualized. In the context of the Younger Dryas, this obsession feels less like idle curiosity and more like survival. If fire once fell from the sky, if floods once followed, then to watch the heavens was to guard against the next reset. And so, the monuments become more than architecture. They are warnings, timekeepers, portals. They link us to a lineage of survivors who refuse to let memory dissolve. Through their stones, folded time opens, allowing us to glimpse a world that believed itself vulnerable to recurrence. From here, our path widens. If monuments were built as warnings, then perhaps they reflect not a single catastrophe, but cycles of upheaval. The Younger Dryas may have been one chapter in a pattern that repeats over and over. To understand whether civilization is always at risk of reset, we must now step into the rhythm of Earth itself, into the cycles of catastrophe written not only in myth and stone, but in the climate's pulse. The Earth breathes in rhythms far older than memory. Ice advances, then retreats. Seas rise, then fall. Forests expand, then vanish into desert. These cycles are inscribed in ice cores and ocean sediments, repeating across tens of thousands of years. To study them is to hear the heartbeat of the planet, steady, yet punctuated by sudden convulsions. The Younger Dryas was one such convulsion, but it was not the only one. If it reset civilization once, Could it happen again? In the Greenland ice sheets, scientists have identified the Dansgaard-Oeschger events, abrupt warmings and coolings that flickered across the last 120,000 years. In mere decades, temperatures could rise or fall by 10 degrees Celsius, plunging ecosystems into chaos. Each event reshaped the Earth's climate, forcing migrations, altering rainfall, and extinguishing species. The Younger Dryas fits this pattern, the last great flicker before the Holocene's relative calm. It suggests not a singular anomaly, but a rhythm, a drumbeat of catastrophe woven into Earth's fabric. Consider too the Heinrich events, when vast armadas of icebergs broke from northern glaciers and drifted into the Atlantic, freshening and cooling the seas. These episodes, spaced across tens of millennia, are marked in sediments by layers of ice-rafted debris. Each time, ocean circulation faltered, climates wavered, and life was reshaped. Humanity lived through some, clinging to survival, but left little trace, as if each upheaval pressed the reset button before complexity could fully bloom. If these cycles are real, then the Younger Dryas was not unique. It was part of a series of blows that rhythmically erase and remake the world. Civilizations may rise in the interludes, only to be swept away when the rhythm turns. Could Atlantis have been only the latest in a chain of lost worlds? Could the stories of floods and fire echo not just one catastrophe but many, layered together until they became archetype? The possibility unsettles because it extends into the future. If the Earth pulses with catastrophe, then our current age of stability may be temporary. Already, ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica groan with strain. Already, methane seeps from thawing permafrost, as it did at the Younger Dryas onset. The patterns we see in ice cores whisper that resets are not ancient history, but ongoing possibility. Cultures of the past may have understood this intuitively. By watching the heavens, tracking the solstices, and encoding cycles in stone, they may have sought to guard against recurrence. The Vulture Stone, Stonehenge, Newgrange, all may have been built not only to remember, but to predict, to read the rhythm of catastrophe in the sky and the seasons. Perhaps they knew the pulse better than we do, and their warnings have been lost in translation. Cycles of catastrophe also explain the persistence of myth. When floods and fires come again and again, each generation inherits not only stories, but anxieties. The Hopi speak of successive worlds destroyed in turn, by fire, by ice, by flood. The Hindu Vedas describe pralaya, periodic dissolutions of the cosmos, after which creation restarts. The Maya calendar echoes cycles of suns, each ending in disaster. Different tongues, same theme. The reset is not once, but many times. If civilization has risen and fallen before, we are inheritors not only of survival, but of amnesia. Each cycle leaves less behind, until only whispers remain. Bones in tar pits, soot in soil, stars carved on stone. The Younger Dryas may have been the last great erasure before ours, but the Earth's pulse continues. The real mystery is not whether catastrophe happened, but whether we are living in one of the rare pauses between. And so the trail leads us to silence, to the question of what remains after each reset. When the floods recede, when the fires cool, when the ice retreats, what is left but ruins and whispers? In those whispers lies the echo of all that was lost. To follow them is to step into the stillness after the storm, into the spaces where memory dissolves into myth, and it is there, in the silence that follows, that our journey will end. Dawn spills across a world remade. The glaciers that once clawed at continents retreat, their weight lifting from the earth like a fading nightmare. Rivers swell with meltwater, seas surge into valleys, and plains that once carried herds lie empty beneath the tide. The Younger Dryas has ended, yet the silence it leaves is heavy, as though the planet itself exhales after holding its breath for 1,000 years. What remains in that silence? Not the mammoths, not the saber-tooths, not the vast plains of Doggerland. What remains are fragments, black mats of soot, bones sealed in tar, corals climbing to keep pace with a rising sea. And beyond the physical, what remains are stories, of floods, of fire, of a world destroyed and reborn. Across cultures, from the tablets of Mesopotamia to the songs of the Hopi, echoes of the same event ripple. Myths become the vessels of memory, carrying fragments of truth across millennia, like lanterns drifting on a dark river. Göbekli Tepe stands as sentinel in this silence. Its pillars rise against the sky, carved with animals that no longer walk the earth, symbols that may chart a comet's fiery descent. Entombed deliberately, perhaps to guard what was too dangerous to leave in the open, it speaks to us in riddles. Alongside it, Jericho's walls, Karahantepe's stones, and the submerged plains of Doggerland all whisper that the Neolithic dawn was not an invention from nothing, but a continuation after loss. Civilization did not rise, it rose again. The conspiracy of silence persists in our own time. Scientists debate, institutions hesitate, critics dismiss. And yet, with each core drilled from Greenland, each sonar scan of the seabed, each ancient genome unraveled, the picture sharpens. The Younger Dryas was no ordinary chill, no simple glitch in climate. It was a threshold, a storm that erased, and a silence that followed, in which humanity reassembled itself. Perhaps this is the legacy of the flood, that we are not the first but the latest, that beneath our cities and our certainties lies a palimpsest of worlds forgotten, civilizations reset by cycles we barely comprehend. Atlantis may not be a single place, but a symbol of all that was lost. Drowned coasts, shattered monuments, erased legacies. Our myths preserve the trauma, our stones preserve the warnings, our DNA preserves the survivors. And now, standing in the calm of the Holocene, we too live between storms. The ice still melts, the seas still rise, the planet still breathes in rhythms beyond our control. The Younger Dryas whispers not of a single event, but of recurrence, that reset is woven into the Earth's fabric. The silence after the storm is not forever, it is only an interlude. So let us listen, while the world is still quiet, to the ruins that glow beneath the sea, to the folded time within myths, to the portals of stone aligned with the sky. Let us carry forward the lesson left in fire and flood, that civilizations, no matter how mighty, are fragile before the breath of the planet and the fire of the heavens. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour greets you as these stories unfold? If you feel the pull of these mysteries, consider subscribing and journeying with us deeper into the shadows of history. For there will always be more to uncover, more silences to break, more legacies to retrieve from the storm. Until then, drift into rest, letting the echoes of lost worlds guide your dreams, and know that history's greatest secret may still lie beneath the waves.